Hello everyone, good evening. I'm just let me pour myself a drink and we're gonna get right into it. So once more we are going to do our little story time as we travel to Colonia. We're going to take a few breaks to discuss what we're doing and such and so forth. So last time, where did we get to? Last time he had managed to get home. He'd had a tea with his wife where he'd discussed things, and he'd decided that basically the Martians are
Frameshift drive charging.
Absolutely.
3, 2, 1, engage. Warning, temperature critical.
So what we're going to do, first thing I'm going to do is turn that video game down because that is really loud. By the looks of it, it's loud for you lot as well. Occasionally you might be able to hear comments. My partner is in the room doing some electronics, so we might check in on what she's up to at various times. Let me just establish what I'm up to and we'll get started properly. Okay. 61 jumps to destination. Cool. Chapter 8. Friday night. The most extraordinary thing, King. The most extraordinary thing to my mind, of all the strange and wonderful things that had happened upon that Friday, was the dovetailing of the commonplace habits of our social order, with the beginnings of a series of events that was to topple that social order headlong. Then I'll scan. Haley is currently singing copyrighted music, trying to get me banned.
Frameshift drive charging.
If on Friday night you had taken a pair of compasses and drawn a circle with a radius of 5 miles around the Woking sandpit, I doubt you would have had one human being outside it, unless it was some relation of stench or of the 3 or 4 cyclists of London people laying dead on the common, whose emotions or habits were all affected by the newcomers. Many people heard of the song, of course, and talked about it in their leisure. They certainly did not make the sensation that an ultimatum Germany would have done. I think I completely misread that. Anyway, in London that night, poor Henderson's telegram describing the gradual unscrewing of the shot was judged to be a canard, and his evening paper, after wiring for authentication from him and receiving no reply, the man was killed, decided not to print a special edition. Even within the 5-mile circle of the great majority of people were inert. I have already described the behaviour of men and women to whom I spoke. All over the district, were dining and supping. Working men were gardening after the labours of the day. Children were being put to bed. Young people were wandering through the lanes, lovemaking. I imagine in this context, lovemaking doesn't actually mean shagging. I have a feeling they were expressing their love, courting. Or everyone in Victorian England was shagging in public. Students sat over their books. Maybe there was a murmur in the village streets. A novel and dominant topic in the public houses. And here and there were a messenger or even an eyewitness of the later occurrences. Caused a whirl of excitement. A shouting and running to and fro. But for the most part, the daily routine of working, eating, drinking,
System scan
sleeping
complete.
went on as if it had done for countless years, as though no planet Mars existed in the sky. Even at Woking Station and Horsell and Coburn, that was the case. Right, let's scoop a bit of fuel and get out of here.
Fuel scoop disengaged.
In Woking Junction, until a late hour, trains were stopping and going on, others were shunting on the sidings, passengers were alighting and waiting, and everything was proceeding in the most ordinary way. A boy from the town, trenching on Smith's monopoly, was selling papers with the afternoon's news. The ringing impact of trucks, the sharp whistle of the engines from the junction, mingled with their shouts of "Men from Mars!" Excited men came into the junction about 9 o'clock with incredible tidings, and caused no more disturbance than the drunkards might have done. People rattling Londonwards peered into the darkness outside the carriage windows and saw only a rare, flickering, vanishing spark dance upon the direction of Hull. A red glow and a thin veil of smoke driving across the stars, and thought that nothing more serious than a heath fire was happening. It was only round the edge of the common that any disturbance was perceptible. There were half a dozen villas burning on the Woking border. There were lights in all the houses on the common side of the 3 villages. And the people there kept awake till dawn.
Frameshift drive charging.
A curious crowd lingered, restlessly. People were coming and going, with the crowd remaining, both on Coburn and Horsell bridges. 1 or 2 adventurous souls, it was afterwards found, went into the darkness, or quite near the marsh, but they never returned. For now and again, a light ray, like the beam of a warship's searchlight, swept the corner, and the heat ray was ready to follow. Save for such that the big area of the common was silent and desolate, and the charred bodies lay about on it all night under the stars. And all the next day, noise of hammering from the pit was heard by many people. Do a bit of scanning.
Fuel scooping.
Have we got anything? Icy bodies, metal rich bodies. They're always worth a scan. So we've got a couple of stars as well. Ah, for the love of... I'm always pressing the wrong button to zoom out. Okay. Looks like it's going to be an interesting solar system to look at.
Fuel scooping complete. System scan complete.
Let's have a look at this, shall we? What a funky looking system. We'll go have a look at one of the planets. What have we got? Anyway, so where were we? We were at the Hammering in the Pit, which would be a much better title for this chapter. So you have the state of things on Friday night. In the centre, sticking to the skin of our world, of our old planet like Earth, was a poisoned dart. The cylinder. But the poison was scarcely working yet. Around it was a patch of silent common, mouldering in places, a few dark, dimly seen green objects, lying in thwarted attitudes here and there. Here and there was a burning bush or tree. Beyond was a fringe of excitement, and farther down that fringe the inflammation had not crept as yet. In the rest of the world, the stream of life still flowed as it had flowed for immemorial years. The fever of war would presently clog vein and artery, deaden nerve and destroy brain, and still to develop. All night long the Martians were hammering and stirring, sleepless, indefatigable at work. Upon the machines they were making ready, and ever and again a puff of greenish-white smoke whirled upon the starlit sky. About 11, a company of soldiers came through Horsell and deployed along the edge of the common to form a cordon. Later, a second company marched through Coburn to deploy on the north side of the common. Several officers from the Inkerman barracks had been on the common earlier that day, and one, Major Eden, was reported to be missing. The colonel of the regiment came to the Coburn Bridge and was busy questioning the crowd at midnight. The military authorities were certainly alive to the seriousness of this business. About 11, the next morning's papers were able to say a squadron of hussars, 2 Maxims, and about 400 men of the Cardigan Regiment started from Aldershot. Cardigan Regiment at least dressed quite warmly. A few seconds after midnight, the crowd in the Chertsey Road, Woking, saw a star fall from heaven into the pine woods to the northwest. It had a greenish colour and caused a silent brightness like summer lightning. This was the second cylinder. Okay. It's going to take us a little while to travel to this place. Okay, so we're getting a bit closer. So if people would rather me read like short stories rather than a one long novel, I'm perfectly open to the suggestion. But for now we'll continue. Chapter 9. The fighting begins. Saturday lives in my memory as a day of suspense. It was a day of lassitude too, hot and close, with, I am told, a rapidly fluctuating barometer. I had slept but little, though my wife had succeeded in sleeping, and I rose early. I went into my garden before breakfast and stood listening. Towards the common there was nothing stirring but a lark. Why is it always a lark? The milkman came as usual. I heard the rattle of his chariot, and I went around to the side of the gate to ask the latest news. He told me that during the night the Martians had been surrounded by troops, and that guns were expected. Then, a familiar, reassuring note, I heard a train running towards Woking. They aren't to be killed, said the milkman, if that's possibly avoided. I don't know why that's my milkman voice, but it is. I saw my neighbour gardening, chatted with him for a time, and then strolled into breakfast. It was a most unexceptional morning. My neighbour was of the opinion that the troops would be able to capture or destroy the Martians during the day. It's a pity they make themselves so unapproachable, he said. It would be curious to know how they live on another planet. You might learn a thing or two. Ah, now, before we go, look at that. Those stars are so close together, that's crazy. He came up to the fence and extended a handful of strawberries from his, for his gardening was as generous as it was enthusiastic. At the time, he told me of the burning of the pine woods about the Byfleet golf links. They say, said he, there's another of those blessed things fallen there, number 2. But one's enough, surely. This lot will cost the insurance people a pretty penny before everything's settled. He laughed with an air of the greatest good humour as he said this. The wood, he said, was still burning, and pointed out a haze of smoke to me. They'll be hot underfoot for days on account of the thick soil of pine needles and turf, he said, and then grew serious over poor Ogilvy. After breakfast, instead of working, I decided to walk down towards the common. Under the railway bridge I found a group of soldiers, sappers, I think, men in small round caps, dirty red jackets unbuttoned, and showing their blue shirts, dark trousers, and boots coming up to the calf. So, in case you don't know, a sapper is a kind of a military engineer. I think they're usually like a saboteur. I'm going to see if we can get... I haven't even checked if this is a landable planet, actually. Yes. It doesn't look as exciting as I'd hoped. Cool stars, though. We're just going to... Nor have I checked the gravity of it. Oh, it's low gravity, that's fine. I have crashed on too many high gravity worlds.
Orbital flight engaged.
They told me no one was allowed over the canal. And looking along the road to the bridge, I saw one of the cardigan men standing sentinel there. I talked with these soldiers for a time. I told them of my sight of the Martians. Haley's just asked a question from stream. There were soldiers coming from Cardigan. Yeah, I made a bad joke about them, saying how they're the warmest regiment. For those Americans, a cardigan is a vest. It's a woolen vest. Right? When an American says a vest, they mean a waistcoat. That's why I said a vest. It's like a waistcoat that you button up. Made out of wool. Yeah, but it's still a vest. Haven't you seen that Gorillaz song? No, that's what we call a vest. What Americans call a vest is a waistcoat. Haven't you seen that Gorillaz song with Mr. Burns? Where he talks about his vest made of real gorilla chest.
Oh yeah, I guess.
I have completely lost the thread on what I'm doing. Sorry, guys. Ah, yes, the cardigan men, who are much worse than Martians. I saw one of the cardigan men standing sentinel there. I talked with these soldiers for a time, and I told them of my sight of the Martians on the previous evening. None of them had seen the Martians, and they had but the vaguest ideas of them, though they plied me with questions. They said that they did not know who had authorized the movements of the troops. Their idea was that a dispute had arisen at the Horse Guards. The ordinary sapper is a great deal better educated than the common soldier, and they discussed the peculiar conditions of the possible fight with some acuteness. I described the heat rate to them, and they began to argue amongst themselves. "Crawl up under them and rush them, say I," said one. "Get out," said another. "What's cover against ear heat? Sticks to cook you. What we got to do is go as near to ground as ground letters, and then drive a trench." "Blow your trenches. You always want trenches. You thought I'd been born a rabbit sniffy." "Ain't they got any necks then?" said a third. Abruptly, a little contemplative and dark man smoking a pipe. I repeated my description. "Octopuses," said he. "That's what I calls them. Talk about fishes or men. White as a fish. It is this time. It ain't no murder killing beast like that," said the first speaker. "Why not shell the darned things straight off and finish them?" said the little dark man. "Can't tell what they might do." What I like here, this isn't just me putting the accent on, by the way. Wells has actually written this accent he's written it phonetically for this accent. "Where's your shells?" said the first speaker. "There ain't no time. Do it in a rush, that's my tip. And do it at once." So they discussed it. After a while I left them. I went on to the railway station to get as many morning papers as I could. But I will not weary the reader with description of that long morning and of the longer afternoon. I did not succeed in getting a glimpse of the common, or even Horsell and Coburn church towers were in the hands of the military authorities. The soldiers I addressed didn't know anything. The officers were mysterious as well as busy. I found people in the town quite secure again in the presence of the military, and I heard for the first time from the tobacconist, that his son was amongst the dead of the common. The soldiers had made the people on the outskirts of Horsell lock up and leave their houses. I got back to lunch about 2, very tired, for, as I have said, the day was extremely hot and dull, and in order to refresh myself, I took a cold bath in the afternoon. About 4:30, I went up to the railway station to get an evening paper, for the morning papers contained only a very inaccurate description of the killing of Stent, Henderson and Ogilvy, and the others. There was little I didn't know. Martians did not show an inch of themselves. They seemed busy in their pit, and there was a sound of hammering and an almost continuous streamer of smoke. Apparently they were busy getting ready for a struggle. Fresh attempts have been made to signal, but without success, was the stereotyped formula of the paper. The sapper told me it was done by a man in a ditch with a flag on a long pole. The Martians took as much notice of such advances as if we were the lowing of a cow. I must confess, the sight of all this armament and all this preparation greatly excited me. My imagination became belligerent and defeated the invaders in a dozen striking ways. Something of my schoolboy dreams of battle and heroism came back. It hardly seemed a fair fight to me that time. They seemed helpless in that pit of theirs. About 3 o'clock there began a thud of a gun, at measured intervals from Chertsey or Addleston. I learned that the soldering pine wood into which the second cylinder had fallen was being shelled in the hope of destroying that object before it opened. It was only about 5, however, that the field gun reached Coburn for use against the first body of Martians. About 6 in the evening, as I sat at tea with my wife in the summer house, talking vigorously about the battle that was lowering upon us, I heard muffled detonations from the common, and immediately after a gust of firing. Close on the heels of that came a violent, rattling crash, quite close to us, that shook the ground, and, darting out upon the lawn, as though the tops of the trees about the Oriental College burst into smoky red flame, and the tower of the church beside it slid down into ruin. The pinnacle of the mosque had vanished, and the roof line of the college itself looked as if a 100-ton gun had been at work upon it. One of our chimneys had cracked as if a shot had hit it. Blew, and a piece of it came clattering down the tiles, made a heap of broken red fragments upon the flower bed of my study window. I and my wife stood amazed. Then I realized that the crest of Maybury Hill must be within range of the Martians' heat ray now, that the college was cleared out of the way. At that I gripped my wife's arm, and without ceremony ran her out into the road. Then I fetched out the servant, telling her I would go upstairs myself for the box she was clamouring for. "We can't possibly stay here," I said. As I spoke, the firing reopened for a moment upon the common. "But where are we to go?" said my wife in terror. I thought, perplexed, then remembered her cousins at Leatherhead. "Leatherhead!" I shouted above the sudden noise. She looked away from the downhill. People were coming out of the houses, astonished. "How are we to get to Leatherhead?" she said. Down the hill I saw a bevy of hussars ride under the railway bridge. 3 galloped through the open gates of the Oriental College. 2 others dismounted and began running from house to house, the sun shining through the smoke that drove up to the tops of the trees, seemed blood red, and threw an unfamiliar lurid light upon everything. "Stop there," said I. "You're safe here," and started off at once for the Spotted Dog. for I knew the landlord had a horse and a dog cart. I ran, for I perceived that in a moment everyone upon this side of the hill would be moving. I found him in his bar, quite unaware of what was going on behind the house. A man stood with his back to me, talking to him. I must have £1, said the landlord, and I've no one to drive it. I'll give you 2, said I over the stranger's shoulder. What for? And I'll bring it back by midnight, I said. Lord, said the landlord, what's the hurry? I'm selling my bit of pig, £2, and you bring it back. What's going on now? I explained hastily that I had to leave my home, and so secured the dog cart. At the time, it did not seem to me as nearly so urgent that the landlord should leave his. I took care to have the cart there and then, drove it off down the road, and leaving it in charge of my wife and servant, rushed into my house and packed a few valuables, such plates as we had, and so forth. Oh. A few kilometers up. Okay. Just gonna land here. I know it's a bit early, but I'm actually gonna call it there. Oh shit. So yeah, what we're going to do, I'm sorry for such a short stream today, but I am going to have to call it there. What I'll do, so I'm finishing about 45 minutes earlier than usual. What we'll do, we'll either do another stream tomorrow, or we'll do an extra long stream next week. How's that? Well, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you have a good evening. I will see you soon.